What does it mean to be a disciple? What does it mean to be a Christian? What does it mean to be free? What might it mean to be all these things as a Catholic, as an LGBTQ Catholic, or as the family member or friend or ally of an LGBTQ Catholic? At first glance, you might not think that these readings would have much to say to us. After all, the first book of Kings was written in roughly 550 BC, when the Hebrew people were in exile in Babylon. St. Paul's letter to the Galatians was written around AD 55, and the Gospel of Luke around AD 85. You might not think that they would have much to say to contemporary Catholics, and maybe even less to LGBT Catholics. But of course they do. The Bible is the living Word of God, and if we are open to it, God's voice will always be revealed when we read or hear these readings, no matter how ancient. Let's start with the Gospel, where Jesus confronts head-on the demands of his ministry. Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem, where he will meet his destiny, his passion, death, and resurrection. Even before he gets there, he's facing opposition, and he knows it. He has just passed through Samaria, where the people have rejected him. Notice what Luke says. They would not welcome him. Why? For religious reasons. The Samaritans had a very different idea of what a good Israelite was, and did not recognize Jerusalem as the seat of God's presence. In response to their rejection, the disciples want to punish the people of Samaria. But Jesus says no. He's not going to punish them, but he's also not going to be dissuaded. Then he turns his attention to the demands of discipleship. And he is extremely blunt with the disciples. You can feel him as he's coming towards the end of his public ministry, talking bluntly to them. He fully understands the costs of discipleship, and he wants them to understand them as well. I'll follow you, says one. Really, says Jesus. Well, the really's not in there, but you can. In the Greek, it is. Basically, he says, you're not going to have anywhere to sleep if you follow me. Now, not all of his disciples followed Jesus along the road. Some stayed at home, like Martha and Mary. But many were indeed, like him, men and women alike, itinerant. That's part of the deal, he's saying. Two other disciples offer excuses based on family responsibilities. I have to bury my father, says one. I have to say goodbye to my parents, says another. All good things, but Jesus sweeps those excuses aside. Now, does he really believe that dead people will bury dead people? No, he does not. But he is not above using some hyperbole to make a point. If you're going to follow me, you're going to have to be tough. And if you're going to follow me, you can't look back. And Jesus goes even farther than the Old Testament prophets. In the first book of Kings, we see Elijah anointing Elisha as a prophet by throwing his cloak, his mantle, over him. But first, Elisha says he needs to care for his father and mother. Once he does so, he follows Elijah. Jesus goes beyond that. No, he says, no using your family as an excuse. Nothing comes before following me, not even duties to your family. You know, he makes that point elsewhere in the Gospels. When his family comes all the way from Nazareth to the Sea of Galilee to confront him. Now, we Catholics don't talk about this incident very much because it shocks and even offends many Catholics. But the Gospel of Mark reports that Jesus' family think that he is out of his mind, okay, after his public ministry has begun. So his extended family travels all the way from Nazareth to Capernaum, a distance of about 1 or 2 days on foot, to the Sea of Galilee, where he is living, to restrain or arrest him. That's in the Gospel of Mark. But when Jesus is told that his mother and brothers and sisters are waiting outside his house, he says, "Who are my mother and brothers and sisters? Those who do the will of God." Ties to God are more important than ties to family. Finally, to drive his point home, Jesus uses an image that people in this largely agrarian society would have known well. Once you put your hand to the plow, don't look back. Because what happens if you take your eyes off a team of oxen? They will plow in the wrong direction. Stay focused. Now, each of these readings, though ancient, has a great deal to say to all of us in this church today, especially LGBTQ Catholics. And let me suggest 3 things. Number 1, be tough. Okay? Be tough. The last few years have seen many positive steps for LGBTQ Catholics. And there are, I would say, 2 big trends. The first trend can be summarized in 2 words, and those 2 words are Pope and Francis. His 5 most famous words are still, "Who am I to judge?" which was first a response on in a press conference on the way back from a papal trip about gay priests. That's what he was asked. And then, as the media likes to do, they pressed him more the next day and said, "You were only talking about gay priests." He said, "No, I was talking about all gay people. Who am I to judge?" Francis is the first pope ever to use the word gay. He has LGBTQ friends. And he has appointed many LGBTQ-friendly and supportive cardinals, archbishops, and bishops. Another trend is that as more and more Catholics are coming out and being open about their identity, they and their families are bringing their hopes and their desires, their struggles and their fears into their parishes. And slowly, the culture of our church is changing. Yet it is also a hard time to be an LGBTQ Catholic. Catholic schools are still firing employees who are civilly married. 1 or 2 are in this church today, when many other straight church employees who are also not following various church teachings have no problem keeping their jobs. Church leaders publish documents, issue statements, and offer quotes to the media that betray not the slightest evidence that they have listened to the experiences of LGBTQ people and their families. And of course, on the local level, we still find in some places homophobic pastors, pastoral workers, and parishioners. All the more reason, my brothers and sisters and siblings, to be like Jesus, that is, tough. To first of all, claim your rightful place in your church. Look, if you are baptized and you are LGBTQ or an LGBTQ parent or family member, you are as much a part of this church as Pope Francis, your local bishop, your pastor, or me. Root yourself in your baptism and claim your place in your church. But make no mistake, Jesus is telling us sometimes it's going to be hard. Sometimes your family may misunderstand you, just like Jesus' family did. Sometimes you will feel unwelcome in places, just like Jesus did in Samaria. Sometimes it won't feel like you have a home, just like Jesus felt when he had to sleep by the side of the road. Sometimes you will find that your friends disagree with you, just like Jesus did when he told the disciples that revenge was not his way. But it is all part of the journey. It's all part of being with him, with Jesus. Throughout all of this, Jesus invites you to be tough. Claim your place in your church. Be rooted in your baptism. Know that you are all fully Catholic. You know, lately I've been hearing that it's not enough for the Catholic Church to be welcoming, affirming, and inclusive. And I think I would have said something differently a year ago, but I agree, because those are the minimum. Instead, LGBTQ Catholics should fully expect to participate in all of the ministries in your church, not just being welcomed and affirmed and included, but leading. But to do that, you have to keep your hand to the plow, and you have to be tough. Second, be free. Be free. A second lesson from today's gospel is Jesus' supreme freedom. Look again at what the gospels say about Samaria. They would not welcome him. But Jesus doesn't care if Samaria rejects him. Certainly he would like the Samaritan people to hear his word. We know this because in the Gospel of John, he speaks at length to a woman from Samaria, the famous woman at the well, one of the longest conversations in the whole Gospels, and she later shares their encounter with her people. But if the Samaritans don't welcome him, fine. He's free. He moves on. Jesus is free of the need to be loved, liked, or approved of. He is free of the need to be loved by the Samaritans. He is free of the need to be liked by the disciples, as when he rebukes James and John. And he is free even of the need to be approved of by his family, who early on think he is out of his mind. He is supremely free. And what is he free to do? To follow the Father's will. Many people in the LGBTQ Catholic community feel unwelcome, like Jesus felt, as well as excluded, rejected, and sometimes, as Jesus was, persecuted. It can be painful and enraging, and it's okay to feel those things. It's human and natural. And sometimes those feelings should stir you on to action on behalf of people and groups who are being persecuted and vilified and marginalized. But ultimately, Jesus asks us to be free of the need to be loved, liked, or even approved of, and to be confident in who you are. Notice that Jesus is also free of the need to punish. James and John want to call down fire from heaven to destroy the Samaritans who rejected them. But Jesus rebukes his disciples for this. That is not his way. He is free of the need even for revenge. So be like Jesus. Be free. Finally, be hopeful. Be hopeful. The life of discipleship is not simply a hard row to plow. It's not simply tough. It's not simply a chore. As St. Paul says today in today's beautiful reading, for freedom Christ set us free. Isn't that beautiful? The Christian life is not some terrible burden or yoke, as St. Paul says, echoing the plow imagery of Jesus. No, it's an invitation to live in freedom. Just as Elijah covered Elisha with his cloak, so all of us, LGBTQ or straight, who accept Jesus' invitation, are wrapped under what the theologian Barbara Reed calls the protective cloak of his Spirit. We live in freedom and in joy and in hope, too. You know, it's tempting for LGBTQ Catholics and their families, maybe many of you here, to look at the present reality of our church and say, this will never change, or I feel unwelcome in my parish. or I have no place in this church. But that is not the only place that Christ wants us to dwell. The future will be so much fuller than the present, and Jesus Christ knows this. You keep your hand to the plow, not only because you don't want to lose your way, but because you should never take your eyes off of the horizon. Sometimes LGBT Catholics say that they're done with the church, with the faith, and with God. Yet when looking for Christ in the church, they're only seeing the present. But suffering and death are not the only things that Jesus experiences in Jerusalem. They're not even the most important things. The most important thing is the resurrection. And the good news of the resurrection, which is for all of us, is that hope is stronger than despair. Suffering is never the last word, and love always triumphs over hate. Love always wins, so be hopeful. These readings, my brothers and sisters and siblings, so ancient, so different from us, so seemingly far away, are actually tailor-made for us today, during Pride Weekend, for all of us who are called to encounter God and who are proud to call ourselves Catholics. In these readings, we hear God say to us today, be tough, be free, be hopeful. And for my LGBTQ brothers and sisters and siblings, be the Catholics whom you are called to be by Jesus Christ himself.